When I first came across this story, I was completely taken aback. It had been ages since I had seen such a mess. Betrayal for the sake of revenge, people swinging around with no shame, and even a pair of forgotten panties. If I had been in that situation, I would have been gray-haired by the time it was all over. But you know what? The worst part for me was how oblivious I was. We've all heard those stories where someone's been cheated on and thought, how on earth did they not see it coming? Well, let me tell you, it's not as obvious as it seems. When everything seems fine, you don't go snooping around your wife's business. Why would you? You've got enough on your plate already. And as for Olivia, she didn't show any obvious signs of trouble. Or maybe she did, and I just didn't pay attention. I should have, but I didn't. Olivia had this way of always being busy, always with some new plan, meeting, or event. Honestly, I didn't care about any of it. She'd go on and on about her work, her colleagues, who was getting promoted, who was messing around with who at the office, and I'd just nod along, pretending I cared. In hindsight, I should have paid more attention to what she was saying. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have been blindsided the way I was. But like they say, hindsight's always clearer than the present. Let me back up a bit. So, Olivia, my wife, at least she was at the time, cheated on me, but this wasn't your typical affair. It wasn't some secret fling behind my back. No, she did it with my best friend. And the worst part? It all went down while I was in the same room. Yeah, you heard that right. I was there, completely clueless. How messed up is that? But before I dive too deep into the chaos, I've got to set the stage and tell you about the people we used to hang out with. There were 10 of us, supposedly a tight-knit group, or so I thought. We spent all our time together. Holidays, weekends away, dinners at each other's houses. Some were married, some dating, and a few of us were stuck somewhere in between. Let me tell you about James. James was a great guy, or so I thought back then. He was one of those guys who always seemed to charm the ladies. Easy to talk to, made everyone feel comfortable. But when it came to relationships, the guy couldn't catch a break. Every relationship he got into seemed to blow up in his face. He'd date a girl for a couple of months, and next thing you know, it was over. He'd just shrug it off and joke, saying something like, well, that's life, and we'd all move on. Then there was his sister, Sophie. Now, Sophie was different. She had this presence, the kind of woman who walks into a room and draws everyone's attention. She'd just broken up with her boyfriend, and for a while we all figured maybe she and James would start bringing new dates to our hangouts. But that never happened. She stayed single and somehow preferred hanging out with us, James's group of friends, rather than going out and meeting new people. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now, well, maybe there's more to that than I realized. Anyway, about a month before everything came crashing down, we decided to take a weekend trip, a getaway for the whole group. We rented this huge cabin out in the woods. Calling it a cabin doesn't do it justice. It was more like a massive villa. The place had so many rooms, you could easily get lost walking from one end to the other. The idea was simple. Escape the everyday, drink too much, tell stupid stories, and just forget about everything for a while. That first day was a blast. The air was fresh, and it felt like the kind of getaway we all needed. We drank, laughed, sang songs, and everyone seemed in great spirits. I remember feeling good, like life wasn't so bad. By the time evening came around, we were all inside, sprawled out in the living room. The fireplace was glowing, everyone had a drink in hand, and we were still riding that high from the day. The music was playing softly in the background, and Olivia was sitting next to me, smiling like everything was perfect. Then there was James. He was sitting in one of those oversized chairs with a beer in hand, looking totally relaxed. I remember glancing at him and noticing something shiny sticking out of his pocket. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from the light, but then I realized there was something there. Now, I wasn't thinking too much of it. After all, we were all pretty buzzed. So, I did something stupid. I reached over and yanked whatever was sticking out of his pocket, without even asking. And what do I pull out? A pair of women's panties. The whole room erupted in laughter. It was hysterical. We were all drunk and thought it was the funniest thing ever. I started waving them around, saying, James, buddy, what's this? Changing up your wardrobe. People were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. James, though, he played it cool. He just smiled and said, oh, I found these in one of the rooms. Must have been left behind by the last people who stayed here. Then he made a joke that I'll never forget. Hey, maybe they're my sisters. You think she left them lying around? The whole room cracked up, making jokes about him spying on his sister, and I joined in, cracking my own jokes. It was one of those moments where everything felt so lighthearted, so carefree, even though it should have been anything but. Because those panties? They weren't just some random pair. They were Olivia's. My wife's panties, sitting in my best friend's pocket. And I didn't even realize it. Not then anyway. In that moment, I was just another idiot, laughing along, completely unaware of how badly things were about to implode. After the whole debacle with the panties, since no one could claim them, someone came up with the brilliant idea to burn them. I'm pretty sure it was James who threw it out there. He joked that we should get rid of them, like they were cursed. Honestly, we were all a bit too far gone by that point, so it seemed like the perfect way to end the night. We staggered outside with a bottle of whiskey, making a big production of it like we were performing some bizarre ritual. We found a spot by the fire pit, and someone managed to get a little flame going. The whole group huddled around, laughing like we were in some kind of strange comedy show as we watched those panties disintegrate in the flames. I think James was the one who tossed them in, and we all cheered like it was some twisted sacrifice to the party gods. Looking back, it was all just ridiculous. But when you're that drunk, everything seems hilarious, no matter how stupid it really is. That was only the first night, though. We hadn't even hit the halfway mark. 5 days in this massive cabin, and that was just the warm-up. The next day, we woke up with pounding headaches but still in decent spirits. We figured we'd hold off on the drinking for a while, but we had a full day ahead of us, so we all agreed to take it easy. We went on a hike, had a massive lunch, and then made our way back to the villa to just chill. I was still chuckling about the ridiculousness of the night before, not really thinking anything of it. That is, until something else caught my eye. We were all lounging around in the living room, half watching some random movie on the TV, when I noticed something red sticking out from the couch cushions. My stomach dropped, and I felt this knot tighten up inside me. I pulled it out and found a red bra. And not just any red bra. It looked way too similar to the ones we burned the night before. At that moment, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something just didn't feel right. I looked over at Olivia, who was sitting with the rest of the group, laughing at some joke Ethan had made. I held up the bra and said, "Olivia, is this yours?" She barely glanced at it, just gave a little smirk and shook her head. "No, not mine. Just because it's red doesn't mean it matches, honey." I wasn't buying it. It looked exactly like the panties from the night before, same shade of red, same style. I felt this weird sting in my chest. Olivia rolled her eyes and sighed, clearly annoyed. "Luke, just because it's red doesn't mean it's the same thing. A lot of women wear red underwear. You seriously think I'd leave something like that lying around?" Everyone started laughing, like I'd just made the most absurd accusation in the world. My face was burning. I tried to stay calm, but she was making me look like a complete fool in front of everyone. And the worst part? I didn't have a single bit of proof to back up my suspicions. The panties we burned were gone, and all I had now was this horrible, sinking feeling in my stomach. But what could I do? If I pushed too hard, I'd look like a jealous idiot, and she'd just laugh it off again, like it was nothing. So, for the moment, I dropped it. But trust me, it wasn't sitting right with me. Later that afternoon, I pulled Ethan aside. He was one of the few people I actually trusted in the group, probably because he wasn't as close to Olivia as the others were. I told him about the panties from the night before, and then the bra I just found. I laid it all out for him, hoping he'd reassure me. He listened patiently, then just shrugged. "Man, I really don't think you've got anything to worry about," he said. "Olivia's not dumb. If she was messing around, she wouldn't leave something like that lying around, especially with all of us here." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in my gut told me otherwise. The truth was all these people, James, Sophie, the rest of them, they were Olivia's friends first. I only got to know them because I started dating her. They had this shared history, these inside jokes, stories from before I ever even came into the picture. It always felt like I was the outsider in my own marriage. So I asked Ethan for a favor. "Look, man, if I get too drunk tonight, can you keep an eye on James and Olivia for me? Just watch them, okay?" Ethan gave me this look like I was blowing things out of proportion, but he nodded. "Sure, man, but I don't think anything's going on." I wasn't so sure, though. And as the night went on, I started thinking more about it. While everyone was outside preparing for another night of drinking, I remembered something. I had an old video recorder in my backpack. It was the kind that started recording when it sensed movement, a leftover from when I upgraded my dashcam. I had packed it by accident, but now it seemed like the perfect little insurance policy. So while everyone was distracted, I quietly slipped back into the house, grabbed the recorder from my bag, and set it up in the corner of the living room. It wasn't exactly hidden, but unless someone was really paying attention, they wouldn't notice it. Once it was in place, I felt a small sense of relief. If anything shady was happening, I was going to have proof. I didn't know what I'd do with the footage, but just knowing it was there made me feel a little more in control. That night, I planned to drink like the rest of them. But this time, I was going to be more cautious. I had my eyes on them now, even if they didn't know it. If Olivia and James were really up to something, I was about to find out. By the time the party really kicked off that night, I was already well on my way to being 3 sheets to the wind. The booze hit me harder than I expected, and eventually, I stumbled off to my room. I remember collapsing onto the bed, the room spinning around me. And then nothing. I was out cold. Not even an earthquake could have woken me up. I was completely knocked out. When I woke up the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Most of the group was already awake, nursing hangovers, but no one else was still asleep. I dragged myself out of bed, my head pounding, and went to find Ethan. He was sitting outside on the porch, sipping his coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. I sat down next to him, massaging my temples. "So, how'd things go last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. But there was more weight to that question than he realized. Ethan glanced at me and shrugged. "Everything was fine, man. Nothing happened. You were out cold. I stayed up until the last minute. Just made sure nothing weird was going on." His words should have reassured me. But deep down, there was still something gnawing at me. I forced a nod, mumbling a half-hearted thanks before heading back inside. But as I crossed the threshold, something hit me, the video recorder. My heart started pounding all over again. The haze from the booze and sleep had almost made me forget about it, but now it was all I could think about. I rushed to the spot where I'd hidden it, my hands shaking slightly as I grabbed the recorder. I quickly rewound the footage, skipping through hours of nothing, my impatience building until I reached the moment I'd been waiting for. What I saw on that tiny screen made my stomach drop. The video showed Olivia and me stumbling into the room. Except it wasn't me leading the way, it was all her. She was dragging me along, my legs barely able to support me. I was out of it, barely conscious. I collapsed onto the bed, totally oblivious to what was happening around me. Olivia leaned over me, checking to see if I was truly unconscious, and then kissed my forehead like I was some kind of child. Then, James appeared behind her. He leaned in close to her and whispered something I couldn't quite catch. And then this part still haunts me. He kissed me on the cheek, not in a brotherly way. No, this was something else. Olivia chuckled softly, and James said something that made my blood run cold. "It's wonderful, isn't it?" And then he left the room. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just seen. Ethan had lied to me. He told me nothing happened, but that was clearly a lie. Either he'd passed out, missed it, or worse, he was in on it. But at that moment, none of it mattered. I knew my marriage was over, but I wasn't ready to confront them just yet. No, I needed more. I needed them to feel the same pain, the same devastation. And to do that, I had to be smart. That evening, when everyone was drinking again, I kept my distance, pretending everything was fine. I watched everyone, but mostly Olivia and James. They didn't do anything obvious. No slip-ups, no glances. They laughed and joked like nothing had changed, like everything was normal. But I wasn't watching them tonight. Then, something caught my attention. Sophie slipped away from the group. She left the room quietly, almost like she was waiting for me to follow. I took the opportunity. I followed her down the hall and found her in one of the empty rooms, sitting on the bed, almost like she knew I'd show up. She wasn't surprised when I walked in. In fact, she looked at me with this strange, knowing smile that sent a chill down my spine. Before I could say anything, she spoke first. "Are you finally ready?" Her words hung in the air, and for a second, I was completely confused. Ready for what? But I couldn't let her see my hesitation, so I just nodded and said, "Yeah, I'm ready." I wasn't ready, not by a long shot, but whatever game Sophie thought was happening, I was about to play along. Without saying another word, she stood up, and the mood shifted. It happened so fast, my mind barely had time to catch up. I should have stopped her. I should have said something, but I didn't. Instead, I went along with it, acting on some twisted sense of vengeance, some need to make them feel as broken as I was. Before I knew it, we were in the middle of it. When it was over, I stood up, ready to leave, hoping to forget the whole thing ever happened. But then, Sophie said something that stopped me cold. "I'm glad you're finally part of the club. Now we don't have to hide anymore." My hand froze on the door handle. "What?" She smiled at me, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "I'm glad Olivia finally told you about it. It's been hard keeping our private parties a secret from you." "A secret private parties?" My mind was spinning, struggling to make sense of her words, but somehow I managed to keep my composure. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending I was in on it. "Yeah," she told me. "It's a lot to take in." Sophie laughed, relieved. "I'm just glad we don't have to sneak around anymore. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone until you're ready. I know this stuff takes time." I nodded again, fighting the urge to scream. "Yeah, I appreciate that. Just give me some time. I need to get used to it." "Take all the time you need," she said with a smile, completely oblivious to the mess she'd just created in my mind. I left the room, my head spinning with more questions than answers. So that's what this was all along. This entire time, there had been a secret life unfolding right under my nose, and I had been too blind to see it. Now I knew. But what the hell was I supposed to do with all of this? The next day, after the bombshell Sophie had dropped on me, I knew exactly what I had to do. But I couldn't rush it. I needed to play my cards carefully. If I wanted to get the full picture, I needed to see everything. And I needed proof. No one was going to believe me without it. Not even I could believe it myself. Not yet. So, that night, I acted like everything was normal. I drank, joked, laughed along with the group, pretending everything was just as it had always been. Like I hadn't just discovered that my entire life had been one big lie. I stumbled around, making a big show of being drunk so no one would suspect a thing. When it got late enough, I said my goodbyes and headed to my room. At least, that's what they thought. In reality, I was wide awake, lying there, waiting for things to unfold. I had my phone ready. I deleted some old videos and pictures to free up space, then downloaded an app that would record in the background without lighting up the screen. I positioned myself just right so the phone would capture everything. I had one shot at this, and I couldn't afford to mess it up. An hour passed. Then two. The house was eerily quiet, but I knew it was just the calm before the storm. I could hear faint footsteps and hushed voices outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to blow my cover now. And then it happened. The door creaked open. I barely moved, holding my breath as I saw Olivia and James sneak in, along with a couple of others from the group. They were whispering, giggling like teenagers who thought they were being clever. I kept perfectly still, pretending to be passed out as they moved around the room. And then the real nightmare began. I won't get into the details, not just because I don't want to risk getting banned from any platform, but because honestly, it was disgusting. They were all in on it, Olivia, James, everyone. The swinging, the secrets, the lies. There was so much filth there, more than I could ever have imagined. Just watching it unfold made my stomach turn. These were people I once called friends, and my wife was doing this right under my nose. But I wasn't just a helpless bystander anymore. I had filmed everything. My phone quietly captured the proof I needed, the visual evidence of their betrayal. By the time it was all over, I felt like I had seen more than enough. My hands trembled as I held the phone. I wanted to storm out of the room, to confront them right then and there. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to keep it together, hold my emotions in check just a little while longer. Once they were done, and the room cleared out, I didn't waste a second. I packed my things quickly, quietly, making sure I didn't leave a single trace behind. I didn't want to stay there any longer than I had to. My heart was racing as I snuck out of the house unnoticed. The truth was, I don't think anyone would have even cared if they'd seen me leave. They were so wrapped up in their own twisted world that they wouldn't have noticed if the whole house had burned down around them. The villa was tucked a few kilometers away from where we had parked the cars, down a long dirt road through the woods. Walking through that dark, eerie forest in the dead of night, with only the moonlight filtering through the trees, was unnerving, to say the least. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch made me jump. But it didn't matter. My mind was elsewhere. All I could think about was what I had to do next. The footage on my phone was just the beginning. I needed more than proof of Olivia's betrayal. I wanted revenge, real revenge. I wanted them to feel every bit of the pain I'd been drowning in. By the time I reached my car, I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused. My mind was set. And what I had in store wasn't just going to hurt them. It was going to destroy them. When I finally got back home, the drive through the empty streets felt surreal. Like I was drifting through some dream, or more accurately, a nightmare I couldn't escape. My head was spinning from everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The weight of it all was suffocating. I sat in the car for a moment, the engine still running, just staring at the dark outline of my house. I was trying to calm the storm inside me, but no matter how deep I breathed, it didn't help. The memory of what I'd seen, of what I now knew, was burned into my mind. Then, as soon as I stepped inside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It had been silent during the drive, but now it was lighting up with notifications. Missed calls, texts. I knew exactly what had happened. Someone at the house, one of those backstabbing people I used to call friends, had realized I wasn't where they left me, passed out and clueless. They were panicking, trying to figure out where I was, what I'd seen, why I wasn't answering. I didn't check the messages right away. I didn't need to. I was already one step ahead. I walked over to my desk, still in my jacket, and opened my laptop. I knew I couldn't keep all of this inside. It wasn't just about getting it off my chest. It was about taking control. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was the one holding the cards. I wasn't going to let them slip through my fingers. But I wasn't about to reveal everything all at once. No, I had to be careful. I had to be precise. I had to hit them where it would hurt the most. I began typing a post, brief but pointed. I wasn't about to reveal every filthy detail. This wasn't about that. It was more of a teaser, just enough to set the stage. I censored the parts that could get me banned, but I left plenty to the imagination. I wrote about betrayal, lies, and how I uncovered things that were never meant to be discovered. I let it sit, simmering just enough to stir up curiosity, panic, maybe even fear. But I wasn't done. I had the footage, the real proof. The things I'd seen through the lens that were too explicit to mention here. There was more dirt than anyone would believe. I uploaded the video, but not publicly. Of course, I wasn't that reckless. But I made it clear that if anyone wanted to know the truth, if they were brave enough to ask, they could message me for the link. A part of me actually relished the idea of them squirming, debating whether or not to reach out, knowing exactly what I had captured. The post itself? I set up a burner account. No name, no profile picture, nothing to link it back to me directly. But let's be real. I knew it wouldn't take long for them to piece it together. No one else had access to that video. And when they figured it out, I knew they'd panic. Once everything was ready, I hit post, sat back in my chair, the adrenaline still surging through me. It felt like I'd crossed a line I could never uncross, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. But honestly, I didn't care. I'd set the wheels in motion. After a long, restless night, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. The constant buzz of my phone had only intensified since the early morning. Missed calls, voicemails, texts. It was overwhelming. Each notification a reminder of the mess I had caused. I picked up my phone and started scrolling through the flood of messages. The names on the screen told me everything I needed to know. Ethan, James, Sophie. They were all reaching out in a panic. I didn't even bother with the voicemails. I could already guess what they'd say. The texts were another story. My so-called friends were furious. Their messages were laced with threats, insults, and accusations. They were desperate to get me to back off, terrified I'd expose their secrets. They were trying to intimidate me, to scare me into silence. But it was too late. They knew the damage was done, and now they were powerless. But what really stood out? Not a single word from Olivia. No calls. No thanks. Not even an attempt to explain herself. Part of me wondered if she was too proud to reach out, or if she was genuinely afraid of what I had on her. Either way, her silence was deafening. I wasn't bothered by their threats. I expected them. They thought they could bully me into backing down, but they had no idea how far beyond that I already was. I couldn't waste time dealing with their panic. There was one last thing I had to do that morning. I grabbed my phone again and quickly dialed the number of the lawyer I'd been putting off calling for months. The conversation was brief, no small talk, no pleasantries. I told them to prepare divorce papers. No more waiting. No more chances. I wanted it over with fast, and I wasn't looking for any loopholes. The marriage was finished, and I wasn't going to let Olivia walk away from this without facing consequences. By the time I hung up, the calls and texts had slowed, but I knew this was just a temporary lull. The storm was far from over. As I stared at the screen, watching more notifications come in, I realized this was just the beginning. The real fallout was about to hit. When Olivia came back later that day, I was ready. I'd spent most of the afternoon packing up her things, throwing whatever I could into boxes without a second thought. I wasn't worried about how it looked. I didn't care about making it neat or organized. I just needed her gone. The apartment looked like a tornado had torn through it. Boxes piled up by the door, clothes tossed in without any care. I wasn't trying to be civil anymore. I was done. She walked in, acting like everything was normal, eyes scanning the room for signs of trouble. I guess she thought we'd have some kind of heated argument, but when she saw the boxes, reality set in. She started talking, trying to play the victim, like this was all some misunderstanding, like we could work things out. Maybe she thought she could charm her way out of it. She always had before, manipulating me into forgiving her. But I wasn't buying it this time. Before she could finish her sentence, I looked her square in the eye and said, "Go to hell." She froze, caught off guard by my bluntness. And she wasn't alone. She had brought a few of her so-called friends with her. The ones I used to think were my friends too. They stood behind her, smirking, like they thought they had the upper hand. Like they could intimidate me into backing down. Ethan was the first to speak up, stepping forward with that self-righteous look on his face. "You're going to regret this, man. You think you can just mess with people's lives like this?" I didn't flinch. I was beyond caring. "Get out. Now, or I'll call the cops," I said, my voice calm but firm. They could tell I wasn't bluffing. They hesitated, exchanging looks, but in the end, Olivia stepped forward, trying to reason with me one last time. I wasn't interested. I just pointed to the door and told her to leave. She hesitated for a second, but eventually they all left. As they walked out, they muttered insults and threats, but I didn't care. I slammed the door behind them, the sound echoing in the emptiness of the house. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. They didn't sue me like I thought they might, but the threats didn't stop. From time to time, I'd get texts or calls from block numbers, vague, anonymous messages meant to rattle me. They wanted me to feel intimidated, but I was past that. I wasn't going to waste my time reporting it to the police. It was just noise at this point. The divorce, thankfully, moved along quickly. There wasn't much to fight over. Olivia knew she didn't have a leg to stand on, and I wasn't interested in dragging it out. A couple of weeks later, the papers were signed, and it was finally over. After the divorce was finalized, I wasted no time. The house went up for sale, and within days it was sold. Honestly, I didn't care about the money or the place itself. It was just a building full of too many ghosts, too many painful reminders of everything that went wrong. I couldn't stand to be there another second. I packed up what little remained of my life and left for another state, determined to start fresh. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not that they would have cared, anyway. I needed to disappear. I needed to erase everything. New place. New people. No past. Nobody. It wasn't about running from the memories. I didn't think I could ever escape those, but it was about getting as far away from it all as I could. I don't care how far I've gone or how much I've tried to move on. What happened in those final days, those images, those feelings, they haunt me still. It's as if they're burned into my mind, replaying over and over in every quiet moment. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Maybe, eventually, the memories will fade, but right now, it's too soon. It's still too vivid. And maybe that's where the story really ends. I don't know what the future holds, but I can say this much. I'm not letting anyone in like that again. Not after what happened. To anyone who's reading this, thank you for listening. And if there's any advice I can give you, it's this: be careful who you trust. The people who you think would never hurt you, sometimes they're the ones who will break you beyond repair. Update. It's been a few months since I packed up and left everything behind. The house, the so-called friends, the memories, everything is gone. I'm in a quiet town now, far away from the noise of my old life. And honestly, it's peaceful here. No one knows me. No one knows my past, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Things look good on the surface. I found a job that doesn't remind me of everything I lost. It's just a job, a distraction really, but it helps me keep moving. I'm getting into a routine, a new rhythm. The people here are nice. Too nice, maybe, but I keep my distance. It's not that I'm not interested in connecting with anyone. It's just that I don't know how anymore. Trust doesn't come easy. Every time someone tries to get close, I feel myself pull back, put up walls. I don't even know how to lower them anymore. Sometimes I still have these vivid nightmares. Not about what happened directly, but more about the feeling of betrayal. That constant sense of being blindsided. It's as if I can never truly let my guard down. Not even in my dreams. I keep expecting the next blow, the next hit. It's like a part of me is always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I replay the past in my mind all the time. Olivia, James, that whole mess. It's like a wound that never really healed. I try to move on. I try to convince myself that I'm free of them, but it doesn't feel like it. I met a few people here. They've been kind. They've invited me out to drinks, to gatherings. But every time, I find an excuse to stay home. It's not that I don't want to be around people. It's that I don't trust myself to let anyone close again. I keep thinking, what if they're just like Olivia? What if they betray me again? So, I stay to myself. I go to work. I come home. I keep my head down and focus on rebuilding what's left of my life. It's lonely, but it feels safer. I don't have the energy to risk being hurt again. Not yet, at least. Maybe one day I'll be able to trust again. Maybe I'll meet someone who can break down the walls I've built. But for now, I'm fine with the distance. It's better to be alone than to risk being destroyed all over again. So, here I am. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again. I don't have to keep looking over my shoulder anymore, wondering what's being said behind my back. For now, that's enough. To anyone reading this, be careful. Guard your heart. Because once it's shattered the way mine was, it's not something you can easily put back together.